Welcome to the Faceoff. Today, we are talking about the topic of sourcing travel versus outsourcing. I'm Caroline Meyer, your host from Get Travel Solutions, founder and principal consultant. And here with me today, I have my guest co-host, Greeley Cook from 490 Consulting. Hi, Greeley.
Hello.
And Greg Sweeney from BCD Travel, VP of Global Sales. Hi, Greg.
Hello.
And Mark, head of UK Global Consulting for American Express GBT. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Carolyn. Hi, everyone.
Good to see you. So this topic has really risen, and we're hearing a lot about this topic. It's really in reference to the actual travel manager role. And Green and I keep hearing more about it and seeing a lot of Mark's activity and talking with Greg. We've been hearing about it, and I thought about an example from Microsoft from a few years ago where they were outsourcing the travel manager, and I was wondering why. So when a company's thinking about outsourcing the travel manager or keeping it internally, this travel manager role, is it strategic or is it tactical? And I'll start with Greg on this question.
Well, thank you, Caroline. So first, we got to talk about, why are they thinking about outsourcing the travel manager role? In some cases, is it knowledge? Is it bandwidth? Or is it cost? Or is it flexibility? And then you have to define that travel manager role, because we want to be able to determine, is it going to be a strategic travel manager role, or is it going to be a tactical travel manager role? And defining that role depends on how we want to go about looking at that role for someone that could be part of the program management team of that TMC, or actually part of the program. And that comes in, to freeing up some of the internal strategy to some of the tactical stuff. I've talked to a lot of travel managers and, procurement people. We're seeing, travel management fall under procurement. That leads us, do they have the knowledge, for travel? Can they outsource it? Do they have the bandwidth to manage it? And that comes into play as, can the program management handle some of that tactical stuff, or does it have to be, part of the travel manager role? And then it comes into, what about the supplier relations, and how are we seeing that intertwine with that travel manager role? I just had a good friend here in the Bay Area move over to Festive Road, and now as a travel manager for a large company, and so where's that travel manager role go? If they outsource it, it goes back to the TMC or to a consultant. And so they get the job anyway, it's just through a different party and who's paying their check. So there's a lot of, changes going on in the industry about the role and where it lies, and, what the company's objectives are about that travel manager role. Do they need it internally? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the bandwidth? Is it a cost thing? Can they do, a full-time employee, or they can outsource it and have that flexibility? So there's a lot of decisions when it comes to looking at a travel manager role. And it really does come, defining that role is that first thing and that first step that I see when we're looking at a travel manager role.
Yeah, I think that makes sense in terms of defining the role. Mark, what are your thoughts on that? And what are you seeing today?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would probably counter it with, I think it's both. I think, you have to have the tactical, and that chips away at the strategy. But I think going back to Greg's point, more and more in the conversation regarding the decision to outsourcing, we're not necessarily seeing those decisions coming from a travel category buyer. Procurement has moved on quite a bit over recent years, and those in that area tend to have responsibility for other things beyond just travel. So that creates a bit of road for the TMC and even consulting partners. I think that's another thing to address, is this isn't just TMCs that are handling this type of situation. There are many players in this field that are offering these types of services to corporates and public sector bodies as well. But I guess the key thing for an organization is based on output. What do they want to get from the role, be that knowledge, be it savings, be it optimizing their program, rebranding, relaunching, whatever the case may be. So I think from the get-go, you really need to take a step back and map out through discovery with the organization where they're looking at their point of arrival in terms of the important aspects of their program, and then you build around the scope of the role to fit alongside that.
Okay, great. And I think both of you are seeing a rise in this, like post-pandemic, as we certainly are. We see this role, the travel manager role changing, a revolution of this role. So not to add on to it, but that's why we have this session, because it's so popular. It seems like there's a lot of it going on, right? Greeley, what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear what Mark and Greg are saying about this. And I guess let's say that a company has made that decision that they want to outsource some part of it, right? Whether it's the tactical aspect and they have a travel manager that's on the company's payroll, so to speak, or they've decided to outsource all of it. I guess then the next decision point, once they've determined that, would be who to outsource it to, right? And we've heard the examples that, there's multiple parties you can outsource it to. You can outsource it to consultants, you can outsource it to TMCs, you can outsource it to others as well. And so I guess given that we have two TMC folks on the call here, because I know this comes up in the discussions I've had with buyers as they're thinking about this, is, well, if I outsource this to my TMC, who's and please don't take offense to this, but who's keeping the TMC honest? Because that's been one of the primary roles of the travel manager, right? To manage KPIs and to manage supplier relations, all the things we talked about. So let's focus in then on your aspects of this. And Mark, let me come to you first. So
sure.
How do you look at this and say, well, yes, we're managing ourselves, but
yeah, I think it's a case of who guards the guards in one aspect. It's a valid point, and I would definitely say that, to the point I made previously, in those early discussions when you're framing out this type of solution for a client, you really need to have those honest conversations about the checks and balances that are required of the TMC. I think certainly in my own experience, within consulting at Amex GBT, that is where our outsourcing operations sits. So although we're part of the TMC, we're sometimes a little bit more agnostic in the approach that we take from a consulting perspective. And I think that aids in those discussions with outsourcing, and certainly helps when it's a consulting firm that isn't part of a TMC. It probably makes it even easier in those instances as well. But having that cadence around governance and where not you can sort of cross the line in terms of involvement is really key. But I guess the conversation piece on outsourcing in general takes many different modes, because in certain situations that I've been in, we're talking about spend management, and that's a rising topic as well. So if you're looking at that end to end, that's a very different matter, and the mode of which the outsourcing model takes becomes completely different than the traditional travel manager per se.
Okay. Well, then let me ask Greg same question, but with a couple different wrinkles on it. So then, if the TMC is the outsourced provider and it comes to recommending technology, recommending a service or support, again, I guess, back to what Mark was saying as far as setting the proper governance structure, how do you make sure that that company is getting the best product, whether it is from your TMC or it could be something else?
Exactly. And that comes back to, defining that role and defining that supplier relationship. Who's going to own that supplier relationship? I'm in a sales role. I've actually called on outsourced travel managers that are from the other company. how much are they really going to give me, and how much am I really going to give them? Even I might not even know they're outsourced,
That's
and
right.
so that's one of the things out there is, I could be talking to an outsourced travel manager, and I
Yeah.
could be sharing, our differentiators
Right.
with that supplier, and that's my competition. So we really need to think about that and talk about technology. That TMC could be aligned with a certain technology, but there might be other technologies that are out there that they might not actually integrate, but it actually might help that company on a gap that they might have. So that's where, having that, discussion of defining that travel manager role and that supplier relations. And, if those opportunities come up, that has to be an internal discussion with the company, and, that has to be, I would say, defined, or, if something comes up, it needs to be evaluated at the company level, not on the outsourced travel level, because, there's mixed, goals or objectives on both sides. So it's a tough position, especially when it comes from a TMC. But it also, there's benefits on both sides, because they can actually see some of the opportunities and growth, because they know, the TMC so well that they know that how they can implement it. And I always say implementation doesn't end when you launch. It's an ongoing thing. So there's benefits on both sides. But when it comes from supplier relations, it does need to be defined. We've heard stories in the industry, outsourced travel managers talking to other TMCs, talking to certain suppliers. And, I think some suppliers might hold back, because, they want to make sure that, this is, they're able to articulate, their true TMC, and not be able to, give information to another TMC that's, might be able to use it for whatever case they deem. So it is a tricky balance, but if you define it right, it can be benefits for both sides.
Could I go a little bit deeper then on the governance? And so, Mark, I like how you frame that this governance is important. So then, in an outsourced, let's say the whole program is outsourced, then your point of contact within the company could be somebody in procurement that does or doesn't have travel knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you define that, or how do you set up those governance structures for those situations to really monitor it?
Yeah, I think the structure of which you're dealing with it and who those interactions need to be with on both sides of the fence takes a bit of time to discover. It depends in procurement who you're dealing with, and as I mentioned previously, outsourcing in general, we tend to be dealing with those that are further up the food chain in the organization more recently. So it will be the director of procurement, it will be the CFO. Yep. And I think depending on the nature of the organization as well, governance sometimes trumps everything else in terms of levels of priority. So I think in those instances, when you set the rules of engagement and the cadence around how you want to treat it, whether it's through interactions, whether it's through defining the output that the outsource roles are delivering, you can agree on a model that works for all parties. But, there's no getting away. It's a difficult conversation. And, it essentially can, in some instances, be the TMC marking their own homework. And that's what we want to get away from by clearly outlining how we're going to do it, what way we're going to do it, and how we'll be measured and who we'll be accountable to in that organization as well.
So Caroline, I have one more question if you don't mind.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So then, Greg, let me direct this one to you. Are you seeing a difference in company size?
Yeah.
Right.
You're thinking the same thing, really.
Yeah. Right. I mean, Caroline, what do you think? Right? Is it company size? So,
is it the size, or is it the trend of, like, we're saying post-pandemic, we're living in a pandemic? So is it the fact that people are starting to travel, and are you having new clients come in that don't have, is it the rise of new clients coming to you with a new travel program that's small? So it's a smaller company, and that's why we're seeing like a high rise of this? Or is it kind of spread out across this mid-market and enterprise, a small mid-market enterprise, in terms of the size of the organization? Go ahead, Greg.
So yeah, this is why it's such a great topic, because we're seeing it in all categories.
Yeah.
From
Oh, okay.
small, medium,
That's
and
great.
large.
Okay. Right.
Because if you think about the small, medium, they might not have the knowledge, so they outsource it to gain that knowledge, bring that that knowledge back to the company. And then in the large markets, they have the knowledge, they don't have the bandwidth.
The people.
If you have this large, global, and there's 4 people that's managing this huge $100 million program, they might need to outsource of it, and they need the flexibility. They don't have the cost for a full-time employee. So that's the changing of all of it, because it's structured on all of the segments, small, medium, and large. When we're seeing it quite often now on the large, instead of just the small and medium, just because of the knowledge. It's bandwidth now. Do I have time to manage 57 countries, and being able to get that information out? So it's interesting, because it's across all segments now.
Yeah.
Okay. You too, Mark? Or how would you see?
I think it's a dual trend, in all honesty. I think if we look at where we have been in the last 2 years and where we're headed, there's certainly a rise of more small to medium enterprises that are now going, wow, in what we've just been through and the disruption that is now surfacing as a result of the return to travel. How do we as an organization manage that? So the first conversation is, do we need a TMC? That might be another face-off topic.
Right.
Second becomes, do we need a travel manager? And that's where the conversation becomes organic, because you solve the need of the TMC and the others become evolutionary over time, I guess.
Okay.
Well, we've seen that, right? Where the headlines have been the demise of the travel manager role.
Yeah.
In and of itself, right? We saw that when online booking tools came about, or we saw that, you can go back in history and look at those articles. Here we go, right? The demise of the TMC role. But if, in a way, though, that skill set that is required, whether you're working for the company or it's outsourced, it's the same skill set. So I know, Greg, you mentioned this, but Mark, let me come to you. I mean, have you seen then where have companies just said, hey, we want this position off our books, we'd rather have it on your books, so to speak, and just move the whole team over to you? Or do you look for this travel manager skill set and just say, look, we want to recruit these people, because we need them for all these different outsourced accounts that we have? And then I guess another part of, I've got like 3 questions all together. And then, do we see that once you hire somebody, are they dedicated to an account, or do they work multiple accounts, right? So that's kind of a bundle of questions there for you.
I'll start on the first. There certainly are instances where, and I've come across them in the past, where we have had someone on the other side of the fence in the client's organization, they move into the TMC environment. It's not as frequent as what others may think it is. It's often the case the need is identified and you either resource it from internally or you hire someone from the open market. So that's certainly where it is at the moment. In terms of the latter part of your question in allocation of resource, typically it works better when they work on one client, and there's lots of different reasons for that we touched on. Guarding the program and the optics of that within the supplier landscape, dealing with hotels, airlines, whatever else. It's often difficult to wear 2 hats. So we tend to find that they're 100% solely dedicated to an individual client, in my circumstances anyway.
Okay. What about you, Greg?
Well, the travel manager role is not going away. They're just getting their paycheck from a different person.
Different person.
Even if they're with the company, they can go to the consultant role, then go to the TMC. We want that person. We're all, trying to hire, trying to, get people. We need those travel managers because of that knowledge. And that's why this topic is, so relevant, is, if they're not with the company, we're hiring them, or the consultant company's hiring them, to take that travel manager role. And it's just, what is it? What is that defined role? Like we talked very at the beginning, is it strategic or is it tactical? And those are the things that it needs to be defined, because some of the things that we talk about with our clients, they talk about, okay, program manager, account manager, whatever you want to call it, is what can they take on and what responsibilities do they have, and then what responsibilities do the traveler manager has. They all kind of blend. And it's funny when you talk to procurement people, they're like, well, just have the program manager do it or the account manager do it. Well, they can only do so much. And, they do have several accounts that they might look after. Can you hire a full-time, program manager, account manager takes some of that tactical stuff? But that travel manager role sits in that middle. And, they have both sides, tactical and strategic. So we got to make sure that role's defined, because we do hear, push it to the account manager. Well, that's they're not travel managers.
Right.
They are there to help facilitate the program, not manage that strategy of the company, and the visions of the company, aligning it with the company, taking if there's sustainability goals, making sure that travel program aligns with all those things. That's where that program manager, account manager doesn't align. That's why that travel manager role is so important. So we want to make sure that we have those roles defined to help support that program, and that knowledge is key. And it's very important to have that knowledge within an account base, even if it's small to large.
So I think we answered the question about the size and the skill set sort of, and the last question I have, greatly to dig further into it, sorry, is about, well, if we're saying the travel manager role has changed, right, or it's revolutionized, is it really, to your point, if you're writing out this description and you're outsourcing this role, I realize that every company is different, right? So no program is the same, but are you seeing any trend in the role where when you're writing the definition of the role, it's different stuff than, let's say, 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Mark, I'll put that to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this stems back to where we are in the world.
Right.
There's actually a brilliant white paper where the CEO of Amex GBT had given an analogy that companies should have chief travel officers. I'll leave that one for you to ponder over. But
okay.
There's definitely a rising trend where there is more involvement with other aspects of the organization. We're seeing the scope of direct involvement more frequently with HR, learning and development, risk. And sustainability, no doubt, is always top of the list in terms of how the organization can tackle that. But I think the internal alignment is really important. The role of a travel manager, if anything, in the return to travel has become more and more important, but also more visible in an organization as well.
Yeah, I think so too, because of the whole safety aspect. The same thing, Greg, or when you're writing these descriptions, are they starting to sound a little bit different to you with the things that Mark said, or?
We all became health experts,
Right.
I mean, think about it. Airlines have chief health officers. Whoever thought an airline would have a doctor on their staff?
That's fair.
So we became, that duty of care risen, before the pandemic, what are your top three? It was cost, experience, duty of care. Now it went duty of care, experience, cost.
Right.
It all flips. And the travel manager role was, so critical the past 2 years because everything stopped. They had to change everything. Ask any travel manager how many times they've changed their travel policy the past 2 years. It went from no, can't travel, okay, approval. Now it's the next stage. We're lifting things, and that policy kept changing and changing and changing. And to get that sign off. And here's the critical thing: who is the ultimate decision maker when you're saying, okay, you can travel, you can't travel? Who's the approver? That was the, when I was talking with travel managers, it was like, this is coming from our CEO. Before the pandemic, you had, just a group that was deciding this. Now it's
right.
so visible that, because there's so much risk to the company, that's, it's escalated. Just to Mark's point, it has escalated so far up, and the visibility of it, is great. And I think travel managers should take, control over it and say, this is what we should have been. We should have been reporting to, the C-suite. Caroline, we've talked about that before, in our previous conversations. It should be, that top level, because it's definitely, top 5 spend in the category of most companies too.
Well,
So
let me jump in here then.
Fun.
Yeah, let me jump in here because I know we're almost out of time, but I got one quick question with that, because I know when I was a travel buyer, the key to my success was that I could walk up to the C-suite at any time, right? And have those discussions with our CEO, COO, CFO, about travel, and that people knew I was there. So in an outsourced role, do they still have that visibility or that access? That is the key to managing the program like you were defining, Greg.
I would say, it depends on how you set it up, and, who's responsible for what. It still needs to be that the visibility needs to still be, moving up that chain, even if it is an outsourced travel manager to whoever they're reporting to, that goes up. It has to be a collective group, because it still needs that visibility, even in the times we are, right now.
Yeah. And Mark, what do you see as far as that access and visibility?
Yeah, I think, to the point that we discussed earlier, I think you set the rules of engagement, but I think there's definitely space to have a conversation about arming the travel manager, be it outsourced or in-house, with a mandate to be able to get stuff done. And if that means going to the top of the food chain, so be it. And I think they should, especially where we are in the world at the moment, to be able to get the backing of the C-suite for an initiative or whatever it may be. And I've seen more success, especially regarding the return to travel, when an initiative is endorsed from the top down. It gets more buy-in, it gets more traction, and people pay attention. So it's certainly important that conversation is had at the get-go and everyone's on the same page, for sure.
Okay. Well, I feel like we haven't had a lot of questions this time, so I think we scratched on a sensitive topic. So we try to ask as many questions as possible, throughout this to kind of get everything out there. I guess the last thing you would ask is for the travel managers and TMCs on this call. How do travel managers find this role if they're looking for this outsourced role, or has a TMC find these travel managers? And since you're both, involved, I'll point to Mark. I've seen a lot of activity with you. So yeah, how do you find this match? How's that work for you? Or what advice could you give the travel managers and who are out there looking for this role? Where could they find this role, if they're looking for it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the instances where I am, it's you've seen some of the roles that I've posted on social media and whatnot as well. There's plenty of different ways that they're communicated, and they'll be hired as outsourced travel managers. That's how the ad goes out. Travel, as we all know, it's a big industry, but it's also a small and well-connected one as well. So you get a lot of referrals, people chatting amongst the industry as well. That's really where it stems from. But we do a lot of direct recruitment, and I think we talked on this previously as well. The talent pool that we're tapping into for these roles, be it a direct hire to an organization or through a TMC, it's the same group of people that we're all chasing after as well.
Okay. And Greg, what about you? Where are you finding these people, or any advice you could give to either side to help them find that match?
Network.
Show up to the Faceoff.
I mean, I shared with you earlier, I just found out one of my friends left and went to a consultant company,
I know.
So, it is network, LinkedIn, working with your current TMC if you're working with them, because that knowledge that we're all looking for in that travel manager, there's opportunities out there. Companies are looking for that knowledge. And so they can make a better program. So it's the opportunities there for those travel managers, through that network community, through the GPTAs, through, all of us that are on the call as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Greeley, any last words of wisdom to the folks out there? Any advice?
No, I think it's just like this is another, as I always say, another tool in the toolbox.
Right.
And whether it's all the program or part of the program because you've got a special implementation or whatever the case might be, it's another tool, right? And needs to be evaluated and what works best for the company.
Yeah, especially now because as an option, it seems like it's a little bit more open.
Right.
So yeah. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We're at time, so I wanted to say thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Mark and Greg and Greeley, for joining me on the Faceoff again. Have a great week. We will post this video out to on LinkedIn so everyone can see it if they missed it, and it's on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe so you don't miss any future events. And we have our next event September 27th. It's going to be on team travel versus individual. So that's a business travel trip versus let's call it team or group travel. Okay. So we'll see you in September. Look out for that. We'll be posting everything out on LinkedIn. And thank you, everybody. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Mark.